Greetings and welcome to this special edition of the show as we celebrate the incredible life of Hamish MacInnes, looking at his pioneering winter climbs in the Munros and far beyond, his game-changing, life-saving inventions, his founding of Scotland's first mountain rescue team, his extensive writing, TV and feature film work, and much more, using rare archived footage to tell the story of one of the greatest mountain men that will ever live. As always, if you find yourself enjoying the show, clicking like and subscribing really helps the channel to grow and produce more free content like this for you to enjoy. Sit back and clip onto the rope for the adventure of a lifetime. Hamish MacInnes was born in Gatehouse of Fleet, a small town in Dumfries and Galloway, as the youngest of 5 siblings. His father, Duncan MacInnes, hailed from Fort William, and his mother, Katie, formerly MacDonald, from a small village on Skye.
The quiet village of Camisteenwig, where my mother came from.
Duncan had fought in the First World War and served in the British military police in Shanghai, so Hamish's imagination would likely have been fired with stories of travel and adventure from a young age. The family moved to Greenock in 1944, but the urban life felt confining to the young MacInnes, having grown up on the edge of the Galloway Hills. The 15-year-old Hamish began to notice a neighbour's motorbike laden with ropes and climbing gear on which he would disappear every weekend. This was Bill Hargraves, a tax inspector by trade and at weekends an avid rock climber. His destination was the Arrochar Alps, a range at the head of Loch Long. Eager to get out of the city for an adventure, Hamish asked if he could tag along. They ascended a spectacular Alpine-like crag called the Cobbler, with Hamish showing a keen eye and natural aptitude for climbing. A lifelong passion had been kindled. Says Hamish, I was very fortunate to team up with Bill Hargraves because he was a very good climber and he showed me the basic safety measures, what to do and what not to do. There were no outward bound schools in those days and no way of getting climbing tuition. It was basically a DIY situation and that could be very dangerous, which was really part of the fun. While never an official member, MacInnes frequently climbed with the legendary Craighdhu Club, a group of young working class men from Clydeside, restless through unemployment following the global financial crash of 1929. The situation, particularly for those in shipbuilding on the Clyde, was terribly bleak, with no work, no money and little with which to occupy themselves. The Cobbler, relatively close to Glasgow and offering a wide range of challenges, was becoming a favourite testing ground for their rough and ready, do-it-yourself style of climbing, where the equipment consisted of a rope and, if you were lucky, cigarettes. The climbers made their way to the hills by hitchhiking, or as in Hamish's case, by bicycle. The risk, the expansive landscapes, and the spirit of adventure that they found in the mountains offered an escape from the crushing destitution of the city and its soul-destroying labour exchanges. Pioneering a daring, direct style of climbing, they honed their skills the hard way, through trial and error and through experience. Hitherto, mountaineering had been the preserve of the middle and upper classes, but by the late 1940s, the Craighdhu Club boasted some of the most talented climbers of the day, fit, lean and agile, with copious levels of daring-do, many leading the field in Scottish mountaineering. They were a bunch of pretty tough blokes from the shipyards and all very good climbers. Through them, I was catapulted to quite a high standard at a fairly young age. Hamish explored beyond Arrochar to Glencoe and its fearsome Uinich Éach, further building his prowess and mountain sense. At 17, showing his knack for invention, he built a motor car from scratch to reach the hills, and over the next few years conceived of a design for a revolutionary all-metal compact ice axe. Aged 18, having hitchhiked across war-torn Europe to reach Switzerland, he climbed the Hornli Ridge of the Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps, a tricky and exposed route that remained a stern test even for seasoned mountaineers. Unable to afford hut fees, he soloed it from Zermatt in a day. MacInnes undertook national service in Austria, and while on leave, took the opportunity to scale other Alpine routes and even the fearsome Italian Dolomites. In 1951, Hamish decided to make a solo attempt at the Charles-Grépon Traverse, a sensationally hard and dangerous proposition for any climber, let alone a relatively inexperienced 21-year-old whippersnapper from Greenock. I mean, one look at this thing tells you all you need to know about the level of bravery and commitment required to climb it. While aware he was pushing way above his limits, the will to climb overrode any sense of intimidation that Hamish may have felt. At Schnell's Field, he chanced upon the now legendary French guide Lionel Terray and his client, who were also en route to attempt the traverse. Hamish followed them at a respectful distance, and the climb went well. Upon reaching the Mummery Crack, Terray observed with interest as the ebullient youngster made bold moves on challenging ice and rock with natural ease and confidence. Hamish was taken with the sheer magic of the great face, walls and towers. Self-deprecating to the last, he suggests that the real reason for Terray's close observation of his climbing was likely that it was preferable to be able to keep an eye on someone who you know is determined on a rash course of action than to pick up the bits afterwards. Near the end of the day, on abseil behind Terray, a sling, corroded through UV exposure, snapped and MacInnes swung out away from the rock bollard, falling 40 feet and crashing back against the face, legs crumpling below him. Bleeding from the head and almost blind from searing pain, he dangled 600 feet above the glacier until Terray and Raymond Lambert, who was luckily climbing nearby, assisted him to safety. In his own words, Hamish walked off with the gait of an ungainly ballet dancer, but most importantly, alive. While bold and adventurous in his early career, Hamish was not foolish. He paid close attention to the key principles of risk management and objective judgment, absorbing information and experience from those with whom he climbed like a sponge and applying it to his own technique and climbing philosophy. Hamish recognised that having good mountain sense, that is, the ability to instinctively analyse and adapt quickly to changes in weather and conditions on the mountain, was just as important for successful ascent as technical skill or personal courage. By now an increasingly accomplished alpinist, Hamish had his eyes set on even loftier horizons. The great ranges of the Himalaya beckoned, the ultimate test of mountaineering ability and endurance. In 1953, aged just 23, MacInnes and his friends in the Craigdoux Club resolved to attempt the as yet unclimbed summit of Mount Everest, the world's highest peak, without oxygen. In 1952, just a year before, Hamish had seen a lecture in Edinburgh by the Swiss climber André Roche, whose Swiss expedition to Everest earlier that year had been turned back by storms high on the mountain. Hamish's ears pricked up at the mention of the copious amounts of food left by the expedition in their hasty retreat, and the cogs in his head began to turn. Showing a sense of abandon almost unthinkable in modern times, the motley party embarked on a voyage to Nepal via a £10 assisted immigration package to New Zealand, from where they would double back up to Central Asia. With no permission to climb from the Nepalese government, no visa to enter the country, and very little money, they aimed to use the aforementioned supplied camps from the previous year's Swiss expedition for sustenance on the climb. One can only imagine the keyboard warriors' fury if they'd put that on their Facebook page before leaving. In the end, only MacInnes and John Cunningham made it all the way to the Himalaya. For comparison, the official 1953 British expedition, led by John Hunt, was comprised of 14 climbers, aided by 20 Sherpas and around 320 porters. The Craig Dhu expedition, meanwhile, turned up at Everest Base Camp with 2 climbers, 1 porter, a sack of potatoes and a sheep. They found the massive British expedition already encamped, with Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary eventually making the historic first ascent of the world's highest peak. Nevertheless determined to make the most of their long voyage, MacInnes and Cunningham made an attempt on the adjacent, then unclimbed Pumori, reaching a very respectable 6,600 metres before the peak's notorious avalanches made further progress impossible. It would not be summited until 1972. They did, however, succeed in making the first ascent of Pingero, a prominent outlier of Toechi. The site of Everest and the mountain's next most obvious challenge, its gargantuan southwest face, must have tantalised MacInnes. Tenzing and Hillary had summited via the southeast ridge, which doesn't technically require climbing until the rock step before its summit, known thereafter as the Hillary Step. It's therefore on paper the easiest route to the summit, but the real challenge of Everest and the Himalaya is the environment, its brutal weather, avalanches and debilitating lack of oxygen. A twilight world on the edge of breathable atmosphere known as the death zone. In contrast, the southwest face was anything but easy, and MacInnes knew it would involve very hard technical climbing at an altitude that had never been attempted before. In retrospect, Hamish reflects that their 1953 expedition was not as harebrained as you might think, and in many ways reflected the trend towards alpinism in the greater ranges. Alpinist climbing, that is, a few climbers on a single rope, carrying everything on their backs, as in the Alps, was at that time beginning to change the traditional national expedition model that had climbed Everest. Rather than waging siege warfare on the mountain, the young mountaineers of the next generation would seek the freedom and greater challenge of tackling the highest mountains without the safety net of a 100-strong expedition to back them up. It's fair to say that Hamish's philosophy was indeed ahead of the curve in this regard. Back home in Scotland, MacInnes linked up later that year with a likewise inordinately skillful young climber called Chris Bonington. Straight out of Sandhurst with an extremely posh accent, Bonington had a very different background to Hamish, and the two made an unlikely partnership. But Bonington was humble, humorous and deeply respectful of Scots climbers, having previously devoured W. H. Murray's Mountaineering in Scotland as fuel for these adventures. The two men bonded through their shared love for hard routes, pushing the limits of what was considered possible in Scottish winter climbing ever upward. They recorded the now legendary first winter ascents of 3 classic routes on Buccleuch Moor, Agag's Groove, Raven's Gully and Crowberry Ridge Direct. Hamish would introduce Bonington to the Alps, making a bold attempt to repeat the Heckmeyer route on the north face of the Eiger. This was unsuccessful, and the pair instead climbed the Aiguille de Tacul. However, the Eiger would later be the scene of Bonington's rise to superstardom in 1965, following his first British ascent with Ian Clough. In 1957, Hamish teamed up with Tom Patey, another skilled, colourful pioneer of Scottish climbing, and made the first winter ascent of Zero Gully on Ben Nevis, an extremely dangerous route that had already claimed several lives in previous attempts. In 1958, Hamish joined Bonington, Don Willans and Paul Ross to make the first British ascent of the fiendishly challenging Bonatti Pillar on l'Aiguille du Drou in the French Alps. At this time, Don Willans was arguably the finest climber of his generation, and shared a similar working class background to MacInnes. He also had a knack for design and invention, being a plumber by trade, and an acid wit, delivered in a withering nasal Salford drawl. In an unfortunate turn of events, Hamish suffered a skull fracture from a falling rock on the first day, but despite being bandaged and stuffed in a corner of the bivouac ledge for the night, he was determined to continue. All the next day, Whillans growled encouragement of "almost there," and they climbed on to summit on the third day, when the weather began to deteriorate. Despite his head injury and frozen hands after losing his gloves on descent, Hamish and the others returned to safety with a legendary climb under their belts. The following year, Hamish and Whillans also climbed the formidable Walker Spur of the Grand Jurasse in the French Alps, hoping to make another first British ascent. However, their hopes were somewhat doused upon finding a discarded Smarties tube halfway up the route, and after summiting, they learned that they had indeed been beaten by only a couple of hours. What's the chances? Hamish moved to Glencoe in 1959 and put up many new routes with the Glencoe School of Winter Climbing. His cunning as a mountaineer earning him the nickname the Fox of Glencoe.
Here in Glencoe, the rescue team leader is one of Britain's best-known climbers, Hamish MacInnes.
In 1961, MacInnes started up the Glencoe Mountain Rescue Team, the first of its kind in Scotland, and led it until 1991, earning him yet another nickname as the Father of Scottish Mountain Rescue.
To find oneself in a position where either one member of one's party had to be rescued by the official rescue service was something that was very embarrassing. And as a result, we used to, as far as it was practicable, institute a policy of carry one's own dead, in that if a member of the party was injured or something of this sort, one used to do one's best to get him off the hill under one's own steam. Well, I think that there has been a change in this, quite rightly, I think, because of the far greater incidence of mountain rescue, the far greater degree of organisation which lies behind it now, and perhaps among other things, the absence today of those letters which used to be so common in the press, complaining bitterly about the fact that keepers and shepherds and people of this sort were being exposed to risk because of the folly of people going on the mountain.
I don't relish danger at all. The only time I feel myself exposed to risk is on a rescue. And some of these rescues can be very, very dangerous indeed. And I feel that, one of these days we're going to lose at least some rescue team members. Occasionally we've got to go up in avalanche conditions. I mentioned earlier where we perhaps wouldn't dream of going up on their own, to climb on their own in certain conditions. And we've very often got to go out and rescue people in these situations. And we'll leave ourselves wide open for being caught in a further avalanche. And this is really where the danger lies. And on several occasions we have been avalanched, and we've just been very fortunate that none of us have been killed.
Forward! Okay? Forward!
I certainly have very fond memories of my climbing experiences all over the world, but one of my lasting hobbies, if you like, is mountain rescue and developing rescue equipment. It gives me a lot of satisfaction because it's something a lot of people will get a direct benefit from. I've been lucky to have this inclination for design work. MacInnes was a pioneer of the use of specialised equipment in mountain emergencies, in some cases designing and building prototypes, as in the revolutionary folding lightweight stretcher that could be carried on the back, allowing much faster evacuation of casualties from the hillside and saving countless lives. This MacInnes stretcher was soon in use by mountain rescue teams across Europe and worldwide, with its various iterations remain in widespread use today. Hamish also pioneered the use of specially trained canine companions in assisting mountain rescue teams, creating the Search and Rescue Dogs Association with his wife Catherine in 1965.
Could I have your attention for a minute, folks? We're just about to start this exercise, and the idea is we want some volunteers to get buried. Well, we've only got 2 graves at the moment, so you have to take turns. You'll be quite safe. It's not very deep with a walkie-talkie, so you'll be able to speak to us anyway, and you'll be well covered up. And one of the police SARDA dogs will find you, and they can dig down quite violently, but don't get too worried. You know dogs, what dogs are like anyway, so there won't be any problem with that. You want to say something, Romerson, about the dogs?
Just Search and Rescue Dog Association. It was started about 1965 in Glencoe here. In our area here, there's approximately 17 dogs just now. Any type of dog is quite good for it, as long as it's got a good nose, knows what to do. What they actually do is they work on human body scent. You probably see in pictures people giving dogs a hanky to sniff for a bit of clothing. The dogs don't work on that principle at all. It's just your body scent that's coming off you. All the time, your clothing, your own skin is giving off. Must be a terrible scent to the dogs, because they can pick it up at great distances on the hill, 500-600 yards away. The dogs will smell you out and they'll just home in on you. Some of the dogs will stand over you and they'll bark on you and slaver all over you. Some folk get frightened of that. Don't be frightened, the dogs will not touch you. All they're doing is just letting the handler know that they've found somebody.
It makes a change digging someone out that's not dead, isn't it?
Right, give me your hand.
Get your hand out nice and slow,
Right,
that's the way.
That's it. Keep your head down.
Head down, that's you just about out the hole now.
That's your head out.
Go on, just pull you, okay?
Right. You got it?
Well, just pull. That's you out now.
Right,
well done.
Okay.
You're in the clear now.
Oh, right, thanks.
Get your hat back on now.
Now get your hat back on, get your head warm.
Okay.
Are you cold?
Well, I'm a bit wet now.
Are you?
Thank you very much.
No,
Some great dogs there,
we
eh?
just take the snow off the radio. Oh, that's it.
Great dogs
Good,
there.
lovely.
They're super.
Yeah, found you no problem. Yeah.
These ideas have saved countless lives, not just in Scotland, but worldwide, as MacInnes' techniques and inventions became adopted internationally by climbers and mountain rescue teams alike. With such an inventive mind, Hamish would often be among the first to notice the shortcomings of climbing equipment during his many excursions to the mountains. He had designed the Terror, the first all-metal compact ice axe, featuring a short pick at a 45-degree angle to the shaft that gave exceptional leverage and increased security on hard ice and snow pitches, and, crucially, would not break like a traditional long, wooden shafted axe. He decided to manufacture his design and make it available to the public when, finding a couple of broken wooden axes after a 3-man party fell to their deaths in Ben Nevis's Zero Gully, he realised a metal shaft may have saved their lives. Its introduction was now imperative. Hamish made the Terror using lightweight aluminium for the shafts, and they proved hugely popular with top climbers. They saw use on hard winter ascents all over the world for many years to come.
The crown of Skye is the Cullen, a place of great beauty and a priceless heritage. These mountains always give me a feeling of the fragility of our civilization compared to their sheer scale and permanence. And for me, they're full of memories of blistering summer days and crystal clear winters. But the peaks can sulk in the clouds for weeks on end, and it can rain as if never to stop.
The last of the winter's snow, and spring is just around the corner. An excellent time to visit Skye.
In 1965, Hamish, Patey, David Crabb and Brian Robertson made the first winter traverse of the formidable Coolin Ridge on Skye, an intricate and highly technical route of Alpine length that remains a serious mountaineering challenge.
The Black Coolin, the most precipitous mountains in the British Isles. They form a 7-mile razor-edged horseshoe of volcanic gabbro, and geologically they are the youngest mountains in the country.
The complete traverse of the ridge had only been achieved in 1911, and a winter traverse was long considered more hassle than it was worth, with difficult, intricate route finding and Skye's notorious weather making snow and ice conditions, to put it mildly, unreliable. However, the party made the full traverse in 2 days, despite being hungover from the potent combination of single malt whisky and Patey's accordion from the night before. Patey records the climb in his book One Man's Mountains as a colourful experience, with mishaps including a broken crampon and Brian Robertson's having to stop every half mile to be sick, providing much entertainment for the intrepid mountaineers. The Pterodactyl, released to the general public in 1970, was an updated, double-headed version of the Terror that resembled said winged dinosaur. This axe could perform a variety of functions on snow and ice, and had a game-changing impact on difficult winter climbing, allowing climbers to push the limits even further and climb new lines previously considered impossible. Such inventions as these would have made Hamish a rich man had not large companies copied, modified and mass-produced his designs much more cost-effectively than he ever could. He wasn't bitter, however. I was primarily interested in safety for climbers, not profit. Amen to that. Tom Patey enjoyed climbing unconventional routes and pioneered many lines on the sea stacks and cliffs of the north coast of Scotland. He was also among the first to see the potential of television in bringing the hitherto closed world of elite climbing to the masses and popularised the sport. Patey organised the 1967 Old Man of Hoy climb, where a group of top climbers including MacInnes, Bonington and Dougal-Haston attempted to climb the towering sea stack off the coast of Hoy in the Orkney Isles, known as the Old Man. The award-winning BBC live broadcast of the event was a ratings hit, and many of the climbers would become household names as a result.
The means of getting the equipment down to the bottom of the stack was a technique I developed here for taking people off mountains, off rock faces, a cableway system where we had very long ropes and the patients were lowered down the ropes on pulleys and they went down very safely and smoothly. And I remember Alan Chivers was watching one day when I was loading this camera and he says, "Do you realise the cost of that camera? The disaster it will be if anything happens." I says, "Alan, we're usually lowering humans down here, which are more valuable than your camera." So he's quite satisfied with that, I think.
The show brought climbing to the masses in a way that often stuffy expedition films shown in university lecture halls could not, and ushered in the concept of the accessible mountaineering documentary. Hamish joined expeditions to climb the southwest face of Everest in 1972 and 1973, the latter under the reputedly abrasive Karl Herlingkoffer, clashes with whom led to MacInnes quitting the expedition, despite his determination to see the face climbed. Neither expedition succeeded in finding a way through the impenetrable rock band at 8,000 metres, the part that required the hard climbing at altitude mentioned before. MacInnes also climbed in New Zealand and South America, including the notorious expedition to make the first ascent of the Great Prow of Mount Roraima in Guyana. Roraima is an enormous rock step rising out of the rainforest at the border with Venezuela and Brazil. Its sheer cliffs terminate in an isolated plateau high above the surrounding land. Its discovery and ascent in the Victorian era led to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's imagining it as the lost world, where dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures had survived the ice ages. The previously trodden, easy way to the top was of no interest to the climbers, of course, and its spectacular Great Prow, a fearsome pillar of grimy grooves and slimy, tarantula-bearing cracks, remained unclimbed. This made it a target for the great climbers of the day, and an all-star group, including Hamish, Don Willens and Joe Brown, would be filmed for a documentary, Climb to the Lost World, also the title of Hamish's book on the expedition.
Joe Brown, once a plumber in Manchester, now one of the world's leading rock climbers. Don Willens, from Lancashire, 2 international Everest expeditions and major expeditions all over the world. Hamish MacInnes, from Glencoe, also 2 Everest expeditions and well known throughout the whole world. Well, if you're going to go on a jaunt of this kind, you might as well choose good company.
It's worthwhile taking another tent up for a bivouac in the face, Joe, provided we get this ruddy gear up by the helicopter. I mean, we've got enough climbing gear, really, I suppose, to start anyway, don't we?
Our faith in this helicopter was rather touching.
The reason the Great Prow hadn't been climbed was probably less to do with its technical difficulties and more to do with the thick, impenetrable vertical forest canopy on the ridge below it. All told, it was an experience that can be best described as interesting.
Fantastic place, isn't it? Look at that. Like axle grease.
Any route including names like Slime Forest and Tarantula Terrace gets an instant no from me.
Tarantula Terrace we call it. It's about 500 foot up from here.
Who was it who came face to face with the spider that gave it its name?
Mo.
I'd stuck the peg in the crack and I think the spider was already in the crack because the next when I got my hammer out to look, it was about a foot from my face up on its back legs. Gripped me bloody rigid.
Sounded a bit of an hysterical note in his voice.
Christ! Bloody spider! Just after this, Don came up, Dumar, and I was sat on the ledge watching him come up, and I suddenly noticed what I thought was a beetle going down the rope towards him. And I thought, oh, it's got another on its back, and then I had a good look, and it was a scorpion. But that cleared off before we could get the hammer to it.
But walking down the rope?
Yeah. Nice place up there.
Still, the camaraderie was strong, I guess it would have to be, and after battling against snakes, scorpions, tarantulas, and never-ending rainy mist, a mist supply drop due to the weather left them without any additional food and, more importantly, cigarettes.
Helicopters out of action.
And all the porters have gone.
Well, they're gone?
9 of them have gone.
We're getting really short of food.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that all those things were going to happen.
No coffee, no fags.
Shortly no food.
They made the summit plateau after a fortnight of slimy attrition with the face and its multiple-legged denizens.
And the rope which I had ascended that day had more or less parted coming up. It was quite a drama, and Don had shouted to me from above, quick before it breaks.
But the only good thing that you can say for going on an expedition of this kind is that it really keeps you fit.
As filmed here by Hamish, the summit plateau is an alien, primordial-looking place covered with rock formations that prevent just landing on it with a helicopter, and you kind of wish that they'd spent more time exploring the plateau in the documentary. However, not everyone was quite so impressed with the overall effort to reward ratio of the expedition.
After going on that face, I think I'd have sooner descaled the boiler in Sheffield in a way.
Next time you're inclined to grumble about boggy approach paths to the Munros, remember, it could be worse. At least you don't have tarantulas to deal with. In 1975, MacInnes was named deputy leader of Chris Bonington's Everest Southwest Face expedition, designing ladder bridges for the treacherous Khumbu icefall. Here, Hamish directs their placement across the deadly crevasses.
Over the left. Not don't go too much. Let it go over. Right, okay. Turn it over now. Twist it now. Twist it.
In 1953, John Hunt's expedition had brought just one ladder with them.
That's fine. Oh, great. Goodbye.
MacInnes also designed next-generation high-altitude box tents for camps on the southwest face itself that would withstand the monstrous avalanches that tore down the Great Central Gully. The MacInnes box was revolutionary, a lightweight yet durable equivalent of the avalanche-proof wooden portable huts designed by Don Willems for the towers of Panya and Annapurna expeditions.
It's not bad, is it?
In this clip, Hamish and Dougal Haston check out the new design.
The door on the side was because of the configuration of the pole, but it's one of these accidental design features, which in fact is quite good. I think it's quite handy having a door on the side, don't you?
It's really worked in quite well, you know. But I don't suppose we'll ever take it down again. When it goes up to Camp 6, it'll stay there, you know.
Well, it doesn't seem to be much point. And anyway, it won't offend the ecologists, because it's going to be blown away within a season anyway.
Yeah, and it's green too, isn't it? They like green colours.
Not very big, of course, but still, it's high-altitude bed and breakfast, 27,000 feet. Not many houses as high as that.
I was looking at the pictures, and certainly the site looks pretty small. I reckon it's just about the right size for it.
I hope we can guy it down all right. I'd hate to think to blow away whilst the summit party were up the hill and come back and there's no tent. Meantime, it's flown over into Tibet or something.
Oh, that can be quite interesting, yeah.
The expedition was eventually a success, with Nick Escort finally finding a way through the treacherous rock band, and the summit was reached by Haston and Doug Scott, another legendary mountaineer who also sadly passed away recently. During the ascent, however, MacInnes was caught in a deadly powder snow avalanche above Camp 3. The density of the powder snow makes it impossible to breathe if buried beneath it, and snow had begun to enter Hamish's lungs before he managed to extricate himself, a terrifying experience that ended his active role in the expedition. MacInnes would be buried in avalanches several times during his career, yet each time somehow managing to pull himself out and survive. He described the experiences thus: "It certainly concentrates the mind. Sometimes it happens quite suddenly and without warning, while on other occasions I've felt as if the whole mountainside was slowly slipping away beneath my feet. There's nothing you can do but go with the flow. I've developed a technique in falling. I quite deliberately bring my hand up to cover my mouth, so that when I eventually come to a halt under the snow, I will at least have a little space in which to breathe before the snow sets like concrete." Jesus. MacInnes' reputation and experience led to his being hired as a safety consultant and occasional stunt double on feature films such as The Eiger Sanction in 1975, which, despite its ridiculous premise and hideously dated script, features Clint Eastwood directing himself climbing on the actual Eiger Nordwand, to this day some of the most dangerous location shooting ever produced. Heavy Panavision cameras were hauled up through the funicular railway tunnel running through the mountain, out onto the face, and craned over to shoot sometimes straight down at Eastwood above vertical drops of over 1,500 metres. MacInnes was key to making these scenes feasible, and he and Eastwood developed a mutual respect during this arduous shooting. Eastwood would readily defer to MacInnes' advice on whether a section was viable to film himself, or if he was safer using Hamish as a stunt double. So some of its scenes actually feature MacInnes himself on the mountain, playing Clint Eastwood, playing a climber, secret agent, assassin kind of guy. Yeah, this film doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
She's gone. She's gone.
Having advised on locations, camera angles and even scripts from Monty Python's Flying Circus during the 1960s and early 70s. Hamish joined the Python's production team to shoot their first feature film, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, at various locations throughout Scotland, including Glencoe, where the Bridge of Death scene was filmed at the meeting of three waters.
There it is! The Bridge of Death!
Oh, right.
MacInnes built the eponymous rickety rope bridge across the gorge and threw the dummies of the unlucky knights who were unable to answer over the cliff. I first met Hamish when we were doing some filming in Glencoe for Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He was head of mountain rescue in Glencoe at the time. He had a great sense of humour and was wonderfully eccentric, which was just what we wanted, and he helped us on the film. He threw bodies into the Gorge of Eternal Peril. I just remember the irony of it. People were looking at this man throwing bodies over the cliff, and we said, "Don't worry, he's the head of mountain rescue." MacInnes would take Palin on many climbs, including a televised winter traverse of the Unigéach. Hamish was made an OBE in 1980 for his services to mountaineering and mountain rescue. Hamish advised Robert De Niro on climbing scenes in the film Mission, and was safety consultant on Bond films including The Living Daylights. His work on Highlander produced the iconic sword fight featuring Sean Connery on the Keech, a spectacularly placed rock protrusion below Sgúr Alasdair on the Black Cuillin of Skye. Hamish and Eric Langmuir set up the now indispensable Scottish Avalanche Information Service in 1988, providing detailed avalanche forecasts and regional information for climbers and skiers in the Scottish mountains. In the 1990s, Hamish was asked by the BBC to film, produce and narrate a series showcasing the Highlands and Islands, Where Eagles Fly. The show featured extensive aerial helicopter footage of landscapes of Scotland with original music from local Scottish artists. MacInnes was a prolific writer whose guidebooks and personal accounts of his climbs date back to 1969, covering rock and ice climbing in the Scottish Highlands, as well as a 4-volume series on walks in the West Highlands. He wrote in the Alpine Journal of his climbs with John Cunningham, hunting Yeti in the Kulu, and his Caucasus adventures on Skelde Traverse and Pikshkurkovsky. His seminal work, the International Mountain Rescue Handbook, is the standard reference tome for all MRT and recovery training, as while equipment has changed. The concepts, principles and strategies it contains remain as relevant now as upon its first publication in 1972. Hamish tragically developed an illness that caused delirium and ultimately complete memory loss, his incredible life story lost to him, and he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in the Highlands. During his stay he eloped from his room and climbed to the roof of the building, as sure-footed as ever despite his condition. It was at this hospital that his old friend Michael Palin found MacInnes and helped him to begin to rehabilitate himself. In time, returning to his house in Glencoe, where he found it easier to piece back together fragments of his memories. Astonishingly, Hamish completely recovered his memory, and with help from Palin and others, appeared in a poignant yet triumphant BBC Scotland documentary, Final Ascent, which we thoroughly recommend for further viewing. Hamish died peacefully, aged 90, at his home in Glencoe in November 2020. In all the annals of mountaineering history, there can be few who have contributed so much to the development of winter climbing safety and modern mountain rescue services. As long as there are those who climb mountains, Hamish MacInnes will never be forgotten.